Welcome to another episode of the Talent Transformation Podcast. Today we have Sean Morris, the principal at Deloitte Consulting and also the firm's U.S. Talent Transformation leader. Sean, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with you today.
It's good to have you here. You're a busy man, so I'm glad I managed to snag you. Wow, there's a lot of things that I want to talk to you about.
Great.
So, I think, first of all, you're in the middle of this really large-scale talent transformation at Deloitte. I want to talk about that. But also, you have really been doing human capital related work for the U.S. government and for governments around the world for, I don't know, I'm going to say 20 years. Is that right? Or
Yeah. So, I've been in the consulting world now for, it's now my 28th year.
Okay.
And I started off in traditional sort of what I would call process reengineering and operational improvements. And I would say the first 2/3 of my career actually were there. I spent a lot of time in the federal space and particularly with post 9/11 with the Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
And as is quite the case often in Deloitte, my colleagues at the time said, why don't you consider getting out of your comfort zone and going in to lead our human capital business? And to be honest with you, this was probably 12 years ago. I really did not have a ton of experience doing that. I thought, okay, I'm going to give that a go. And it's actually probably the best decision that I've made, or one of the best decisions I've made in my career.
Really?
Because it really moved me into a different aspect from a consulting perspective.
Yeah. So when you were doing Homeland Security stuff, you were doing all types of things, not specifically human capital, right? You were doing
That's right.
everything that they would be dealing with.
Yeah, large transformations, technology.
Okay.
Back in the early days, it was the stand-up of a brand new organization. You can imagine all of the integration work that was taking place. That period in time was a unique one for our nation,
right?
Because of what had happened on 9/11. We then saw the proliferation of conflict in the Middle East. And so it was just a very interesting time. And we worked on everything from border security type situations and immigration. I did a lot of work in the immigration space, all the way through to operational efficiency across that agency. And so it was just a really interesting time to spread your wings from a consulting perspective in a very unique way. And these organizations don't stand up very often.
Almost never.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then you come into to Deloitte Human Capital. Deloitte, probably one of the leading, if not the leading, human capital practices, in consulting, right? That's already a big ship running, right? I think it was a multi-billion-dollar business, right? What's it like coming into that? I mean, did you come in thinking you were going to change it a lot, or were they looking for change? Or?
They were.
Yeah.
Okay. We were. Well, look, this was back in the day when our government business was still, our federal government business at least, was still sort of in its infancy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's since grown to be quite significant, big piece of the broader Deloitte network here in the U.S. now. And the human capital practice was actually the smallest of what we at that time called our service areas. And so part of the focus in bringing me in was to expand not just our footprint, but our offerings, and to think strategically maybe a little bit differently than we traditionally had thought about what human capital is, who it serves, and where it should be engaged. And so, I worked with a really talented group of leaders. We put a new strategy in place. We expanded the offerings that we have. We moved into particularly the technology side of the house in a much more significant way. And, the rest is history.
Right. And then and I want to go through that a little bit more, but let's just stay on this, moving through these roles. You then left that practice to now head up this digital transformation in Deloitte, and it's a big digital transformation, right? But so you might step back, okay, and say, well, Deloitte helps other companies do digital transformation, right? And I'd say it's probably a substantial part of Deloitte's business, right? And Deloitte, being a consulting company, has always been a people-centric company, right? So why does Deloitte need to digitally transform?
Well, look, Deloitte has to be agile and constantly evolving, just like any of our clients. Our business space is changing on a regular basis, both in terms of the talent market. We strive to attract and retain and grow the best people in the market. And so that market is not static. And so we have to constantly challenge ourselves to think and evolve that talent experience. The market is not static for our clients, and so their needs change on a relative basis. And obviously our competitors and our teaming partners are changing and evolving on a regular basis as well. So we don't live in a vacuum, and we've got to constantly evolve and change. And that's actually one thing that we're very good at. I think it's a big piece of our success. We've been around for a long time at this point, and we are not uncomfortable in challenging change internal to Deloitte.
Right. And practicing what you preach, because you are out there preaching change and the ability to change.
That's exactly right.
It would be disingenuous for you to not want to change all the time, I suppose.
And by the way, I like telling the story about what we practice to our clients.
Yeah.
Because that is a very genuine way to share what's working and what's not working and how we're learning from that, and then how we take that to many of our client situations as well. It's all part of the same approach and system that we have. The way we think about talent is from the entirety of the talent lifecycle, so the recruiting all the way through to the retirement. And we redesigned and rethought about how we utilize the technology and face off to our clients within Deloitte from a talent lens. And so it was a large transformation of our processes as well as our technology, and a significant change journey, as you can imagine, not just for our talent organization, although certainly that was the largest piece of the change, but also for our customers, those individuals serving our clients on a day-to-day basis.
Well, you had an advantage, really, because you have been putting out this digital transformation types ideas into your customers already on a regular basis before you actually had to consume your own ideas. That's pretty good, right? That most of our customers don't have that opportunity. You know, they have to go out and start it up, you know, cold start, okay, and get it right the first time. And your digital transformation is, I just want to get the scale.
It's actually the largest transformation we've ever taken on
as a firm. Okay.
Yeah, because, I mean, we're in the professional services business, right? So what we do are people. Our people are at the very center of our strategy. They are our key enabler asset because they face off to our clients. And so if you look at it from a data perspective, if you look at it from a complexity perspective, it represents the largest transformation we've ever taken on.
Right. Okay. So it's pretty substantial.
That's right.
Like a typical large company in America. So do you bring people over? How are you creating that transformation process here now internally? Because you've got a whole group of people that are out there doing it, you know, for other companies, helping other companies do it. Do you try and redirect the consulting expertise inside, or do you how do you decide to approach that?
Similarly to what we do with our clients, actually. So we obviously have a significant functional level of expertise in our own internal talent organization and also our internal IT organization. And then we bring the frameworks and the best practices of our consulting business to the table. We marry those together to drive the change and the transformations that we've been going through. And it's interesting because what I like to tell that combined team is that we are a unique internal client to our consulting business, but we also carry the same badge. Everybody on that project is carrying a Deloitte badge. And so that makes it unique when you're thinking about the culture of the team and how to continue to move forward. So it's a little nuanced, but many of the same approaches we use for our clients, we use on ourselves.
Okay, so you're sort of resetting your foundation.
That's right.
For a higher level of agility going forward. What are the big objectives of the transformation besides laying the foundation for being more agile as you go forward? Is the firm looking at that and saying, well, this is great because we're going to be more profitable. This is great because we're going to be more efficient. This is great because our service capability is going to go up. What are the biggest outcomes that they think they're going to get? Or is it retention of the workforce? What are you thinking of as the material, medium-term outputs of a successful transformation?
We want to be the very best that we can be in the market from a talent experience perspective. And our talent organization is obviously an incredibly important ingredient in that talent experience. And so that's the first and foremost is, are we continuing to be on the forefront of that talent experience? I would say the efficiency and effectiveness piece, we're always going to want that. We are management consultants at the end of the day.
Sure. Yeah.
But that was very secondary. It was, we want to be able to continue to invest in that talent experience and be the very best that we can do. And certainly automation and technology is one way to do that. Another way is to help your talent professionals in how they advise both our leaders and our broader talent groups and individuals on the talent lifecycle that I referenced a little bit earlier. So moving from, and we've seen this in the industry quite a bit. You and I were talking about it a little bit before.
I was just about to go to our conversation.
20 years ago about where HR was to where it is today. HR plays a much more advisory role, I believe, today for some really unique situations and needs for a world-class talent experience than it was maybe able to do previously. And so bringing that talent set of professionals on that journey was the most important thing that we honed in on as part of this talent transformation.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so you knew where you were going. Pretty clearly, and obviously that's important. But how do you get everybody else to know where you're going? Do you do this massive communication beforehand? Once you get this vision, do you then go around and make sure everybody has bought into it fully before you start, or do you not worry about that? Let them figure it out as they go along.
Well, certainly you want your stakeholders, your key stakeholders, working from the very, very beginning, which at Deloitte, we're a partnership. We're not publicly traded. Means you've got to have all of your partners and principals and managing directors, as we like to reference them, our core leaders are a key piece of our stakeholders, and they need to be on that journey from the very beginning to understand why are we spending our time and resources to do this.
So that's in your DNA, consensus among the leadership.
Yes,
absolutely. Because
we very much try to keep that as central to our DNA. So I love that term, actually. And then you want to bring your talent professionals, those groups that are going to be most affected by this transformation, on that journey in a continuous way. So very, very standard and structured, maybe is a better word, sets of communications, and not just one way. So we're going to say what we're going to do, and we want our talent professionals in this instance to be super hands-on as part of that transformation with us. Because at the end of the day, they are truly the functional experts, and they're the ones closest to their clients.
Yes, and they're the one whose service is supposed to become better.
Exactly.
So they need to know.
That's right.
They need to have an aspiration. Okay, they need to aspire to that higher level of service before you start explaining to them how you're going to help them get there.
That's right.
Because otherwise, I guess they wouldn't be excited about what you're talking about.
So that change journey starts, really early on in the transformation. I've seen some failed transformations over the years, and one of the reasons that I've seen them fail is because they weren't adopted. by the individuals that were being affected by them. And I think one of the major reasons for that is the organizational change management approach was flawed in that it didn't go far enough upstream and then stay consistent all the way along. It typically waited until the end or right near the end before the implementation dates.
Right.
It said, we're going to put some training out. We're going to do some good communications. It wasn't that. Sure. But people are surprised and they don't see their fingerprints on its transformation.
Right.
As you would if you're further upstream, making them part of the solution.
But that's a big job in big transformations.
It is.
Right? So if you're talking to a client that hasn't even begun, a transformation, what are the things that you tell them are the fundamental building blocks that they need to have in place before they begin?
So I always like to start with a strong vision and strategy. And I know probably a lot of people say that, but what I really mean by that is a vision and strategy that has gone through multiple turns across your organization, across your stakeholders, to really beat it up and to make sure that it's hardened.
Right.
Because it will be challenged on that multi-year transformation journey.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that everybody agrees with it, can get behind it.
Right.
And it will be the North Star, so to speak.
Yeah.
For which you drive through the good times and the bad times. And they will be both on any transformation. There will be twists and turns in the road that you will have to adjust to. And so having that vision and strategy set and hardened on the front end is a major, major piece of getting everybody to coalesce.
Yeah.
And to stay on target. And the last thing I will say is that it has to be, in my opinion, my experience, not so broad that it can be distracting and we can allow lots of other pieces to come to the table as part of that transformation. But very specific, and people understand where the guardrails are on that transformation.
Right. Yeah. So it can withstand the stress that is inevitable.
That's right.
Right. And there can be a fair amount of that. And do you think when you're doing transformations, you did a lot of transformations for government. Okay. And I want to just get a little bit into government because you've done so much in it. We can't let you get out of here without talking about it. How is it night and day, the transformations that government has to do compared to the commercial sector? I mean, is it just are they just two totally separate podcasts? You know what I mean? Like,
I think there are definitely differences.
Yeah,
that's clear. The scale of government transformations it eclipses anything really that you've seen. There are obviously some very large global commercial clients, but if you're looking at particularly federal transformations, that the scale and complexity of the missions and the people they serve in our country, and other countries actually, is very unique. So those are certainly differences. There are a plethora of different stakeholders, some political stakeholders, some constituent stakeholders. So that makes it a little bit unique as well. The change journey and the technology, though, have a lot of similarities. When you peel away those unique aspects of a government transformation versus a commercial transformation. And honestly, you have to get the technology right. You have to get the solution right. No question about that. You have to get it right all the way from the beginning of the requirements, all the way through to the build, the test, and the go live and the hypercare. That is classic. And if you have the right level of rigor in that helps a lot. What is very similar, though, is how you walk those unique stakeholders comprehensively on the journey from the very beginning to the very end.
Right.
And that's where I see the most similarity, even if they're different types of stakeholders.
Yeah.
How you apply your art, so to speak, from a change perspective.
Yeah.
Is still challenging, but there's some real similarities between those two sides of commercial and government.
Yeah. So you start looking at a pie chart of how much time, effort, money you're going to spend doing a transformation, and you've got to create a couple of slices to that pie.
Yep.
And, I think some companies get those slices wrong. And, do you see that? I mean, and obviously when you advise companies, you probably are talking about this, but that upfront conversation is a lot of work.
I think that's the case. I don't know that there's a perfect answer to this. There's a range. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is every organization has a slightly different culture and operating model, right? So let's start with operating model. We have a heavily matrixed operating model. We have a large base of leaders that I referenced earlier. And we are, in many ways, quite a decentralized organization, right?
Yeah.
We're also a culture that wants to be engaged, has a voice because we're made up of owners.
Right.
And that poses its own unique situations. Now, juxtapose that to a much more centrally run organization, maybe a publicly traded one.
Yeah.
And maybe one that's quite regulated, although we have some aspects of our business are regulated as well. But, maybe it's quite regulated. That's a different culture. That's a different operating model. And so, you have to think about that on the upfront piece of planning for this and really walking those senior leaders through what it's going to take to be successful here. And, not all of our clients want to start in that sequencing of events.
Right.
And so you have to be agile and adapt in any transformation. And that could be one of the reasons that you're doing that. And so, just because you don't follow a sequence or a playbook doesn't mean you're not going to be successful, but you have to figure out how to come back to pieces of that playbook at some point to reemphasize them to be successful.
Yeah. Okay. So you have to get there somehow, but there are some different paths.
That's right.
And so you take a big manufacturing company that's been around for, 100 years. Okay. Top down, product centric, with product life cycles that are very long. Okay. Maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 years. Therefore, we're not changing a lot on a regular basis. Those people didn't go out of college and become consultants. They went into a different kind of organization. Okay. And they bought into a different experience. The company wants to transform now. Do you say, okay, let's narrow the scope and is one of the other paths, this very incremental, start somewhere small, do some little thing, is that sometimes what you do when you talk to a company that wants to transform?
Absolutely.
Whoa, don't do what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Okay. We're going to do something different for you.
You have to prove that you've got the fortitude in an organization to take that on. I'm not sure that we would say that to a client, but sometimes the clients will say that to us.
Mm-hmm.
We need to start from a pilot perspective and prove to maybe some skeptical stakeholders here, internal or external to the organization, that we can do that, and prove that we can do it and prove the results of it. And then that will create the momentum for us to go a little bit bigger in the next incremental step. That's not a bad strategy at all. It depends what the forcing function of the transformation in the first place is.
Okay, yes. It could be urgent.
Yeah, I mean, if your competitors are eating your lunch, then you may not want to be quite as incremental.
True.
If you are visionary in your space and you believe that the horizon that you're looking at is, multiple years out, then maybe you can be a little bit more incremental in it. So it just depends. And that's why understanding and really diving deep into a client becomes really important. It's another piece of the recipe of success for our clients. Is you have to understand their operational structure, what makes them tick. I mean, all of these sound obvious.
Well, yes, obvious, but also often not done. Right. So, the root cause of disruption, why are you really being disrupted, is a big question. And sometimes you can talk to a company and you can get a couple of different answers just from, senior people that have different, they're coming from a different perspective inside the organization. And sometimes, isn't it sometimes just fear? Fear of of being disrupted, and you're not even being disrupted yet.
But we certainly will take a step back with them. We often will do an early set of sprints with them to put together the different, I like to think of it as Lego blocks to be able to get to where they want to go. Have we thought about this piece? Have we thought about that piece? Where are you from a maturity perspective on this particular piece? And they're an integral piece of that conversation, right? Because you want to take them on that journey so that they can understand what is the foundational components of what they have today, and is it a leap to go to where they want to go to, or do we build a bridge there?
Right. Okay.
And it depends on the situation. It depends on whether they want to be a first mover in a particular space, and in some instances, some industries, that's a good bet, right? In others, we know there's the road is strewn with first mover disadvantage.
Yes, that's true. Right.
So it just depends.
So it's really an industry and company specific.
What we want to do at the end of the day is look at it holistically, because we want it to be successful. We want to be we want it to be as successful as we want our clients to be successful. And to do that, it's not a commodity. Transformation is not a commodity. No. It's a journey. And so you have to be on that journey together. You have to build the trust with the client. You have to build the trust with the stakeholders. And that's a nice way of starting to create that foundation so that, you're moving in the right direction. And oftentimes we find there's sort of eureka moments, both for us and for the clients, to say, well, we were originally thinking we'd go in this particular direction, but we've got a couple of things we need to shore up. So let's move in that direction and then go there.
Yeah. So you adjust as you go along.
That's right.
Let's talk about the getting a little deeper into the transformation processes. When you're running big projects, okay, you already got the North Star. You found out, what the root cause of disruption is, and you figured out that the company wants to be a second mover. They don't want to be the first mover, a little too risky for them, too much regulation, trail back a little bit on some things, but they want to become fundamentally a agile organization. How do you explain to them what technology needs to be able to do? Not the technologies itself, but what do you need out of technology to be that?
Well, you may often have to redesign the way you operate today more and more often to the technology that you're implementing. You and I'm going to guess, right, that we're of quite a similar generation. We were used to custom environment that was built to the environment that we had today. And I think one of the unique and I believe positive aspects of where we've moved from a transformation and certainly a technology transformation perspective is that adapting to the technology, or at least meeting in the middle by doing a service delivery redesign in our instance, is a obvious inflection point when you're starting to think about these technologies. And that brings those individuals that are affected by that, who have their fingerprints on that service delivery redesign, on the journey with you, and more likely to adapt and adopt to the technology going forward. There's a tendency that I've seen even in our own organization sometimes, that the technology is going to fix everything. Sometimes it could, but not at the scale, the transformation scale that we're talking about today. That's not very common.
Right. How are you dealing with are you noticing a difference? We were talking about generational differences in people. And when you go into these projects, do you see a generational difference in how people embrace them and how people respond to them?
I think there are. Yeah, you can see some uniqueness there. I'm personally not a huge fan of
the gen models,
boxing people in a particular generation. I think that there are some gross generalizations to be had there. I think what's more interesting is to look at how has a particular generation grown up with unique technologies and environments. And that typically is a more interesting way to think about their adaptability and propensity to accept change And so there's some value in breaking that down there, but not everybody is going to fit every piece of those groupings that we often want to throw out there and say that is that group, and they're homogeneous to that particular group.
True, but they are different. They've had different educational experiences as well as different technology experiences, and so your expectation about your career now is really different than it was then. So you take the technology aptitude very high, you take the educational background different, you take the expectation about the career being very different as well, and then you put that person into a transformation process. For some of them, it might seem like just they won't even know why we say transformation. They'll just be like, "What do you mean transformation?"
No, actually,
just work.
Yeah, I haven't found that. I don't think we've reached that transformation utopia quite yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're not at school. They're not really working yet anyway.
Well, they're just entering the workforce. The reason I said that, though, is my experience, and again, this is going to be a little bit of a generalization, but what I've witnessed is they have a stronger voice than previous generations had. They ask more questions. They have stronger opinions, which I personally think is really helpful. That tells me they want their fingerprints on this transformation.
They don't work if their fingerprints aren't on things.
That's right. That's right. That's been my experience so far.
My experience too, so far.
And the generation one up from them, similar actually.
Yeah, but beyond that, you could get away with this has been done for you.
Right.
You weren't part of this thing. It's okay.
Honestly, from a change journey perspective, that's a gift if you're leading a transformation, because the worst thing around change is ambivalence.
Right.
Because ambivalence will bite you on the back end when you go live. So
actually,
you want them to be engaged.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's you mentioned earlier, dealing with the people that aren't on board, the resistance, and you're right. Ambivalence is the dangerous one because the resistance, you can identify them and you can focus on them and you can work to convince them and bring them over. But the ambivalent people are not so easy to identify.
No.
Just nothing happens and you don't know why.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a hidden risk in a big transformation.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you smoke that out? How do you figure out if they're just going along with you because you're there? When you're not, they're not.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of techniques that you want to bring in along the journey. One is having embedded, I'll call it change leaders in different aspects of the organization that are much more closely connected to different populations that maybe you don't have the most immediate reach into.
Mm-hmm.
I am a huge proponent of data. Get out there and ask and listen and calculate that data on what the sentiment is about a particular process or a particular move that we're contemplating, and measure that constantly and look at it constantly, because over time you start to see the patterns there.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually start to pick out some of the ambivalence from that if you structure it correctly. Data is our friend.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of technology and automation. Over the last 20 or so years, there's some really great tools out there to be able to help us do that aren't distracting, but really give us some key insights about key populations that maybe are further on that change curve than others.
So I can see how that can work in your model where you have the big ideas and the North Star, and then when you go into the transformation, you kind of identified we're getting the digital part right to facilitate the additional transformation journeys that you will be on.
Mm-hmm.
And is that because obviously if you get that platform story right, you actually get to the data. If you don't have the platform, if you're just in the middle of a transformation and you don't have some tech in place, you are without data, basically.
That's right.
Right.
I mean, there are old school ways of doing it that maybe aren't automated. They are slower, more complicated, and honestly more of a distraction from the groups that are part of your transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want it to be. You want it to be embedded. Right. This is what we're used to today, right? So think about every time you buy something from whatever your favorite brand is, you're going to get a follow-up. They know not everybody's going to reply to that. It isn't a nuisance. Some of them will, some of them won't. So it's embedded into our environment and our community these days, which is why you see it so much.
Yeah, the engagement phenomena is a managed process based on data. Feedback is something that you give to get a different level of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
I think people now, have really gotten around that idea, completely, right? So let's talk about that platform, though. Let's go back into the tech. Is your tech strategy changing a lot now because of large language models, AI? And if so, do you know in what ways it's going to change yet, or is it still too early?
Well, we're at the very beginning of this journey.
Right.
My son came home about this time 2 years ago from college, our middle guy, and started talking about generative AI and ChatGPT.
Right.
And I had heard about it.
Right.
I'd like to think I'm kind of a geeky technologist too.
Yeah.
But I hadn't thought about it from an application perspective. Of course, he was sharing what his friends were doing with it, writing their papers in college. Yeah. But that was only 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? It was only 2 years ago. And so the AI journey, we can talk a long time about the AI journey, and I'm happy to answer questions on that and have a chat about that. I think I'll use an example, though, before we go down the AI.
I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole here because we could run for hours on that, and it's really...
Well, let me say on AI, I believe this, there is no better place in an enterprise structure than your talent organization to be in the middle of AI.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, and you know this, right, is you have lots of use cases that you can apply. You have increasingly a very innovative set of individuals that sit in this important and increasingly important function of any enterprise. And then they also play an important role from a guardian perspective of our people and their data and the rules that we are required and should follow to protect our individuals and follow the right rules and regulations of a city or a state or the federal government.
Yeah.
And so I love that balance, right? You're not going to jump out of the guardrails when you do that in talent.
Right. But if you're a CHRO, this is huge opportunity and huge critical risk at the same time. You're getting sort of both. I mean, I think as a CFO, you certainly think I'm going to apply a lot of AI, but, when you're in HR, AI is it's the type of thing that can allow you to deal with the complexity of human behavior, at a level that you haven't previously been able to do with technology, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's so early that it is hard to imagine exactly what that's going to look like. So I think the way I look at it anyway, as I say, you have to get this digital transformation and this digital framework together. Okay. You have to be well along that road before you are on the other road, because just throwing ChatGPT on top of everything is a no-brainer bad idea. And placing AI inside the organization strategically to add high value where it adds high value and low risk where it adds low risk, and understanding that matrix requires you having some kind of organized digital set of platforms and experiences. Otherwise, the context is not there.
That's right. One of the things, while we're on the topic of AI, that we chose to do from a strategic perspective in our talent organization was to double down on the AI community within talent.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, which I think is reasonable, there are healthy skeptics out there.
Yeah.
There are people that, are certainly pioneers and want to run at 110. And while we were analyzing what are the right digital AI platforms for us to implement as a firm, we were going to go with vendor platforms. We were going to create some of our own, and we're primarily with vendors, but we do have some of our own. We wanted to create, for those small examples where we've got our own, a community of people that are just interested in what AI could do to their day-to-day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That community, by the way, for us is about 20% of our total talent population at this point, probably 25. So it's very large.
Okay.
We have the largest percentage of people that are coming back to some of these tools that we have put in place of anywhere in the firm. And so the theory of this was, let's create a community that can apply it to some aspects of their day-to-day. Let's put guardrails around it so they know what we can do and what we can't do. But let's see what innovative approaches they can come up with. And in doing so, let's build the trust level up and share that as a community. And I think that's been a game changer for us.
Yeah.
Huge game changer.
That's interesting.
Now, everybody else wants to go down the technology road, and I think that's great. But at the end of the day, your culture has to accept and embrace something as big as AI. And I think we're on that journey.
Yeah.
And they're coming up with some wonderful ideas and approaches, which we're then sharing.
Then you have time to analyze them. And yes, right. If you ask the whole organization to do that, you'd be flooded, you'd be distracted, and you might not even find sort the good out from the bad.
It's voluntary, by the way.
Yeah.
They are volunteering their time to do that because they're genuinely interested.
Yeah.
So go back to your question really quickly on machine learning and some of the unique, when you have this digital platform that we just went live with,
what do you do? Right.
What are some of the things that you can do with that? The one that I'm most excited about, and I'm excited about a bunch of them, but this one really has my attention right now, and we're moving out on it at speed, is skills.
Yeah, sure.
So we've thought about skills and the value that having a comprehensive skills approach can do for decades. And the reality is, you and I both know, has been that the technology just hasn't been there.
It never got
for the complexity of the data that you're talking about.
Right.
And we've just had, leaps in that technology. Certainly, machine learning is a big piece of that, but there's some AI in there as well, which now are enabling us to think about skills as a currency within an organization.
Exactly.
Take that down the life cycle. A big piece of our business is we have our team members that are moving from one client to another on a pretty regular, very regular basis, right?
Evolving their skills constantly.
We call that deployment, right? And if you can increase the speed with which and accuracy with which you can deploy an individual because of this new currency, which is much more predictive of success, we believe, then that's a substantial positive from a bottom line perspective and honestly from a talent experience perspective.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about us.
It's both sides.
As a business wanting to increase our bottom line. It is the person actually having the right talent experience on a particular client.
Yeah.
And again, you lead with that, but the outcome is
another thing that's very valuable to you. And we could stay on that for a minute because that which you are doing, which is sort of a basic part of your business, right? Getting the right people to the right customer with the right skill set at the right time, okay, is what most companies in their digital transformation, certainly their HR part of their digital transformation, are trying to emulate internally, right, with their internal mobility programs. They're trying to have the right employee on the right project at the right time, and then later on another project, and to increase output for those individuals and for the groups that they move in and out of, and of course, lower retention, right? So they're trying to do exactly the same thing, except they don't have a commercial practice that is mandating that. You have a practice that says, clearly we're more profitable, clearly our customer's happier if I have the right consultant there. They have the idea, but not as strong they don't have an exterior force that is forcing them to try to get to that optimization. So you're in your big project, okay, right now. Biggest project for Deloitte, you're trying to set the stage for the Deloitte of the future. Okay. The firm is on, you have consensus. Okay. You have a lot of experience. All of the people in your company are well adjusted to change. You've practiced this transformation process with your customers over many years. So you have a lot of experience with it. You sound very excited about what you're doing. I mean,
I
the
love
project sounds really
I love it.
good and interesting. What do you do when you're done with this big digital transformation? Do you personally go back to going out there and doing stuff for the customers? Do you go back to government? Government has huge challenges and huge challenges around skills and around labor and efficiency that comes out of doing all of those things better. Do you go back there, or do you keep working on the things inside of Deloitte?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm not sure I really have the answer to that. I'm actually starting to have that conversation with my performance manager or equivalent of a performance manager right now, and some of our senior leaders. I've been jokingly using the analogy that over the last 2 roles, I feel like I've gotten my PhD in Deloitte.
Yes.
Maybe I'm into the postdoc season at this point. I don't know.
Well, that was kind of my point, though, because that's the skill you've kind of... Now, how do you... do you want to take that more in Deloitte, or do you want to move that out and pass that on to...
I think, look, at the end of the day, there are 2 things that we are fundamentally focused on. We've spent a lot of time talking about the talent experience. We're focused on our people.
Yeah.
First and foremost. And we are very focused on our clients. And so there is no bigger calling for us than to be with our clients at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's where the real beauty of consulting happens. And you never want to be too far away from that, or I don't.
Right.
I'm still in the market. I'm still helping teams with clients.
Right.
I'm just not at the level that I used to be at. So, you could move back in that direction, and certainly that would not be unappealing to me in any way.
Right. Yeah. I wasn't expecting a definitive answer. No. But I'd like to see what happens. Listen, it's been fantastic. I'm so glad you could take time. You're a very busy man, as I said. I'm really glad you could take time to chat here, and I'd love to talk to you when you get this done about what you're going to take on next.
Well, thank you. I've actually really enjoyed this. It's been a great conversation. So
great.
Thank you.
Fantastic, Sean.